Hello, I'm Paolo Rocco, and you're listening to Reprint, brought to you by the Temple News. Your in-depth look into the stories you need to know about. Coach Stan Drayton will no longer lead Temple football after almost 3 years as head coach, so I speak to sports editors Ryan Mack and Colin Schofield to analyze his time here and his legacy. Then I speak to news editor Nurbanu Sahin about a 30% increase in enrollment Temple has seen in the class of 2028. So Stan Drayton's time here at Temple is over. Did it catch you guys by surprise, or if you kind of had the feeling, when was the moment you realized that was like, I think it's coming to an end here?
I want to say I was caught by surprise, not that it happens, but when it happens. Like after a win against FAU, not even 24 hours before that. But we were always thinking about it was just like the vibe of that post-game press conference. Like I know, Colin, you can also go on this as well. It just felt off. Like it felt like he knew that something was going on. Even presser on Monday, his weekly press conference availability, he was not going off, but it felt like he had an axe to grind a little bit, which is like talking about NIL and the financial support. And then on Saturday after the game, it just didn't feel like a win.
Yeah.
That broke a losing streak. It just felt off and just weird. So then it didn't. So that's just what kind of took me by surprise a little bit.
Took me by surprise that it happened? No. When it happened, yes. I agree with Ryan. It was after a win, a fairly momentumous win against FAU, like a game-winning field goal, like best they've looked in multiple weeks. The players were still clearly bought in, which is the most important thing is after you lose 52-6 to lose bowl eligibility. Like if the players had gone out against FAU and clearly showed no care in continuing to play, that's where it's like, okay, maybe win or loss, he's gone. But they went out there and they fought, they scrapped. There was moments in that game where they could have given up and they didn't. And that's a testament to the culture he's built, which is one of the very important thing that's part of this program is that's what he helped fix.
Yeah.
And Ryan said it at that post-game press conference. It was just I think of it as a somber vibe when he walked in. Like again, I'd seen him in better moods after losses than he was after that win. And he brought his daughter up with him, which was a little strange too. He had never done that before. So it was just kind of the whole overall mood was a little strange. And it felt like kind of as the season progressed that it was kind of the writing on the wall. This might be his last year if he didn't get them to bowl eligibility or even like 5-7, which 5-7 wasn't out of the window after the win, but it would be a long road to get there. So it kind of felt like his tenure was coming to an end, but to do it after a win where the players still clearly cared and clearly wanted to play for him was pretty shocking to me.
For sure, yeah. Just kind of breaking down the article that you guys wrote for this print edition. Do you guys think that maybe his initial hiring was a mistake, given that he had only been a positional coach in Texas and hadn't really done any play calling in games or anything like that?
I think it could be viewed as a mistake due to those things. Like it was Arthur Johnson's first hire as an athletic director, and his first experience in that role too, and not having like those things, not being from the area. He played around here, he had coached here in the past, but he wasn't really from the area. So he didn't have like recruiting ties here to grab like the South Jersey Philly recruits. He didn't have that experience calling plays or even like leading a unit other than running backs. And again, I don't view it as a mistake because I think what his biggest thing was coming in, fixing that culture that Rod Carey kind of left in just absolute disarray. He came in and kind of rebuilt that Temple Tough moniker, which I think is just as important as getting those on-field results. I think if maybe we aren't in such a big world of NIL, Stan Drayton gets another year or two to keep building his culture while continuing to build himself as a head coach. But in this era of college football where it's go, 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 you need results like that. 5 years isn't going to cut it for a guy to figure it out. You need to have it figured out in 2 or 3 years. And in 2 or 3 years, he had the culture figured out, but the on-field results just weren't there yet.
I agree with Colin wholeheartedly. I think to just say that it was a mistake hiring him is out the window. Like I don't think you can probably say that. Especially, he wasn't an offensive coordinator. He never called plays, but the people that he had coached at his other pit stops were good. Like he was renowned as being one of the best running back positional coaches in the country when he was hired.
Mm-hmm.
Like coaching Bijan Robinson, who won the Doak Walker Award at Texas. Coach Carlos Hyde. You coached Ezekiel Elliott at Ohio State, Jeremy Langford and Jordan Howard at when you're in your NFL stint, when you're coaching with the Bears. Like, these are good running backs. Yeah. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Like, those are good people. But I will, and even, like, I know a lot of former players really wanted, like, Fran Brown, but there's a lot of, like, gray area and just so much behind that to why that just didn't happen. Mm-hmm. And even with him, he hadn't been a DC yet either. He was just a positional coach, so it kind of goes both ways, at least in my opinion. So, like, do agree with Colin with just the fact that, like, this growing state of NIL, you're only gonna get 2 years. Yeah. Like, he didn't even really get a full recruiting cycle to really figure out, like, how good you really are. Like, and that's unfair to him, but. Yeah, maybe if NIL isn't here, he gets next year, but it just felt like the writing was on the wall with it. For sure,
yeah. So what exactly did he change about the culture, here at Temple?
Just everyone was bought in. It's hard to kind of say what that culture under Rod Carey looked like, just because me and Colin were not here. We just have stories about it. But players were entering the transfer portal during the season. Like people were gone. You're losing guys like Ray Davis, who's now playing with the Bills, who's really good player with the Bills. You're losing these players who have the talent, and because of one guy. So then he had to basically come in and pick up the scraps with that. That's impossible for anyone, and that is impossible for anyone with, like, Temple's not a Power 5 school, Power 4 school. They're a Group of 5 school. It's hard. You don't have to, like, the resources. You have to compete with the Pittsburghs, the Rutgerses, the Marylands, the Penn States. Like, you're gonna have to compete with those guys in just recruiting space, and then you're gonna have the NIL money with that. So that's kind of hard. But he was able to change that culture where people were bought in. People wanted to play for him. Yeah. Even when after the initial news of him getting fired, like, you had players going on social media
for sure
and talking about, oh my God, this is like how much respect they have for him. Luke Watson was one. Tyquan King was another one. Like, Terez Worthy also went out and talked about it. Like, you had players who had love for this guy and wanted to play for him. That's kind of what you needed, honestly. Mm-hmm. Yes, the wins were not there, but he had talked about it a little bit. It's like the tiny victories. Yeah. Might not have in win-loss record, which you ultimately need, but he had helped push the envelope of push the envelope of changing what he had inherited, and that was a situation that was way past his control.
Mm-hmm. I think the one thing I'll add on to that, I agree with everything Ryan just said. He kind of hit it on the head. But I believe it was after the Tulane loss, he said, you can't be Temple tough if you don't get punched in the mouth and then get right back up. And I think under Rod Carey, that Temple loss, after the Tulane loss, those players, everyone in the locker room probably just would have been done. Like, you're not bowl eligible. You get ran over by Tulane. Yeah. The season seems like it's at an all-time low. Those guys don't go out there and compete again for him. But with what he has built in there, no matter how big the deficit is in games, no matter how badly you lose the week before, every single week those players came back and competed their butts off for him and tried to, like, gave everything they had, no matter how dim the season was, no matter how many points they were down by. And I think that was kind of the test in what he built is no matter what the results on the field looked like, his players were out there playing for him because they loved him. And Ryan said there was an outpouring of love on social media to him. And wherever he goes, if he lands on his feet, players may follow him there because of what he built. And it's just as important to the team as it is wins and losses, is that culture. And that, I mean, that's going to kind of be the legacy he leaves behind in my mind. Obviously, most people will not think of him as a very legendary head coach here. But what he managed to do with his players, every single one of those players that have played for him for the last 3 years are going to always speak highly of him.
For sure, yeah. What's kind of been, even before Drayton's time, the disconnect with Temple to not get a road win since 2019?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it might be like a mental thing. I mean, going on the road versus playing at home, I think it has a bigger impact than most people kind of realize as fans. Like, there's just something different about going about your routine at home, being able to sleep in your own bed, lifting in your own gym, eating in your own cafeteria, not having to travel.
Yeah.
Like, I think that kind of plays a bigger impact. Most people think, and I think kind of maybe as the losses piled up, it might have became more and more of a mental thing. And they had the perfect opportunity to get that road win against UConn back in October. They were on the doorstep of winning that game, and the balls didn't bounce their way. They fumbled it on the 1 yard line, and UConn picked it up and returned it 99 yards to seal the game. So it might be mental. It's some bad luck in there. They've dealt with the last few years a gluttony of injuries and a lack of depth, and they've struggled in both of those two aspects. And as the season goes on, it gets harder to overcome those difficulties, which also I think plays into that road struggles. But I mean, to go 0-9 in road games, and even if we predating Stan Drayton to be 0-15 in conference road games in your last 15, like that's a kind of a tough thing to do. And so there's really no way to kind of pin it on one thing. I think it's just kind of a mixture of bad luck, injuries, lack of depth, with maybe a little bit of a mental block in there where you're just not being able to be at your home.
For sure. Yeah, 100%. What was I say? Yeah, so moving to NIL, I know Drayton didn't want to use it as an excuse, but he kind of mentioned it at some point. I forget when. There's no doubt that NIL and Temple's difficulties with that have played a part in terms of not being able to succeed in numbers. What's it going to take for Temple to kind of, find NIL and use it to their advantage?
I think it really just comes with like making football your priority. I think Coach Everett Withers kind of said it best yesterday at his press conference. He was like, all the best schools that like are really good at athletics as a whole, like whether it's like not just like you got football and basketball, like volleyball, hockey, baseball, softball, they have it, are really good, but they're also really good at football. Like you have to make that a priority, and whether that's just a connecting of getting with more collectives, trying to get alumni support, connect with them. Like Temple is a really good alumni base. People that go to Temple, that went to Temple, love Temple. Yeah. And they will make sure that you know that they love that school, that they love Temple. Like no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Just connecting with them, they will be able to give you that support back. Collectives will be able to give you that support back. I think it also really stems from athletic director Arthur Johnson said it when Colin and our other assistant sports editor Sienna went to an NIL event 2 weeks ago now, that he didn't do the best of like doing it when he first got here. When he first got here, this is when they first got introduced it. So you're already behind the 8 ball because you just got hired to a new school. You have to learn it, everything there. Right. But then now you're behind the 8 ball because you didn't take it seriously, but you didn't utilize it to the best of your ability. So now you're behind. Now you're double behind, and now now you're just focused on catching up. Like it's hard now. It's gonna be hard to do that because it's ever changing. Honestly, like some things might come out like today or tomorrow that weren't really there last week, and you have to adapt to that. So I think that is one thing. Just making it a priority. If you want to have the NIL success and make this football team good, you have to make that it's the top priority, because if you're not and you're only doing it like 50%, 75%, you won't even have to go 50, 75%, then it's not going to have success, especially here. Like this is a pro football town. Like the Eagles reign supreme. And not saying that no one cares about Temple football, but like people aren't going to like to see Temple football sometimes. Like how are you going to make it intriguing? And it starts with just making it that big of much of a priority to the alumni base and also to the students as well. Make them want to come to the games.
For sure.
That's why I don't know anything else.
Yeah, 100%. It's been a conversation for years, but me not being on this beat, I feel like I've seen it pick up the last couple months. So I'd like to get your take on it. I mean, especially with the Inquirer article that just came out. What is your guys' take on completely abandoning the football program?
I personally do not think that they should cut and abandon the football program. Yeah. Because Granted, the last 4 or 5 years, yes, they've sucked. It's been bad. They haven't gotten the resources. They've arguably been losing money. But go back to just a few years before that, 10 years ago, they were the most successful team in the American Athletic Conference. College Game Day was here. They were going to consecutive bowl games. They were producing NFL players. Like, there is a strong possibility to have success here. And Stan Drayton said it in his press conference after Tulane. There's a talent hotbed here. You can get kind of cast off some players who didn't succeed at schools like Penn State, Rutgers, Maryland. There's plenty of high school talent here. I mean, there's success to have here. It's just it's the NIL thing. You're not going to succeed unless you're Army and Navy, who aren't allowed to use it. You're not going to succeed without NIL today. Mm-hmm. And I think getting that NIL landscape, even just halving what you don't have right now and improving it halfway will do a massive difference. And even with this team today, like, there's talent on this team right now to where this team could have been more successful than it was. And some of the blame can be put on Stan Drayton and the coaching staff, but there's plenty of talent on this team. And this is a program that can succeed and has succeeded. And I don't think cutting the football program right now at this instance feels like a reaction move. Yeah. So I'm not personally on board with it. I can understand where people come from with it and just throwing all your resources into basketball. But, I mean, for me personally, there's been success here before. There's been success in the past. There's success that can easily be had here if you hire the right guy for the job, and if the resources come, which they should at some point, then there can be success here again.
Yeah, like I see the reason that people would want to like cut it, and like I get it, but for me it's also like, yeah, there was success here. Wasn't, maybe people can call it like a lightning in a bottle a little bit, like just a little year stretch, but like what predating with like what Al Golden was able to do and Matt Rule was able to do, even Jeff Collins was able to carry that success a little bit. You're able to go to bowl games, win 8 or 9 games. Matt Rule won a AAC, American Athletic Conference championship. Like, I get it, but you have the talent here. Like, you have South Jersey, you have like the Philadelphia Delco, like that Pennsylvania area. You have the DMV area, which is really big. But my also thing about it is too is like, you cut football, what are you going to do after that? Because you can always say, okay, we can put the resources in basketball. People aren't going to the basketball games either. Yeah. I that's just my thing with it. Like, if you want it one way, yeah, but people aren't always going. Like, you're barely filling the lower bowl in the Accor Center, and the student center is barely filled up. So it's like, okay, cool. Like, they're not really getting the most support as well. Also, you look at other schools that have tried to do it, like UConn didn't cut their football team, but they tried to go majority basketball, and it lost money. It lost a lot of money, to the point where they're now their football team is trying to join the Big 12 because of how much money they lost to being an FBS independent. Yeah. When the point was that they would save money doing it. Like, and their football team was 10 times worse than what Temple's. Then the UConn's football team was 10 times worse than what Temple's football team was when they did it in 2019. Like, it was abysmal. So, like, I see the point to it, and I get why, but it's just like, what are you really gonna do? Is like, cutting football and putting stuff to basketball, is that gonna make people go to the games? Because people starting really going now. This is a basketball team, like, yeah, they lost 10 straight games, like, we don't gotta talk about that, but like made it to the American Athletic Conference championship last year. Even when they had the team that probably should have made it to the tournament, people weren't, like, the only time I really saw a ton of people at that game was the whiteout game against Houston. Yeah. The Villanova game, when Villanova was ranked, it didn't get filled up until halftime. Yeah. Like, so it's just like, and a lot of the time those games were not empty, but like not that many people were there. So it's just like, well, you gotta have, like, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like, what are we gonna do with it here?
For sure. Yeah. So I mean, what are you guys looking for in the next head coach?
I think my main thing, me and Colin were talking about this earlier. I think the two main things is, you might not have to, you either want someone who has either coached here before, had a stint here, or is from around the area.
Okay.
Like, those are the two main things I really need. Or, like, maybe they have ties to, like, a Coach Rule or something like that. Like, I know some of the candidates, like the biggest name that's been passed around is, like, Elijah Robinson and Jeff Nixon. Jeff Nixon only really coached there 1 year in 2006 as the running backs coach, but he has ties, and he's ties to the Pennsylvania area. He's from Western PA, but can still get, like, those kids at Penn State are kind of recruiting a little bit as well. Knows this area. Elijah Robinson's from Camden, coached here for 3 years. Followed Matt Roof. Baylor was really good at Texas A&M when he was their defensive coordinator and defensive line coach. Like, the area, you can recruit really well. Also has connections with Fran Brown, who's now the head coach at Syracuse. He's the Orange defensive coordinator up there. Like, that is kind of someone that I would like to see. Like, as long as, like, I do think didn't help Drayton was that he didn't know this area very well.
Sure.
Like, even though like he went to Allegheny and like he had a stint up here, but like he didn't really know the lay of the land around here, that kind of ended up hurting him in the long run. Someone like this could really help.
I agree. You tried to go kind of outside the box with Drayton 3 years ago, and it doesn't work out. And I think you got to go with kind of a more clear cut. Okay, this guy is either knows the ties, was here like Elijah Robinson, or knows the area and knows what it takes to get recruits to this program. I don't think this program can afford to kind of go outside of the box again and hire someone who has no idea what they're walking into in terms of either a program or a recruiting base. Well, that didn't work out. And we said earlier, you only have 2 or 3 years to succeed in the day of NIL. And outside the box hire might not be successful in those 2 or 3 years like Stan Drayton was.
Right.
And so hiring someone who kind of knows what it takes to come in here and win and build the program, I think is absolutely necessary to getting the program back on track and avoiding the football program being cut altogether.
Now I speak to news editor Nurbanu Sahin about a 30% increase in enrollment Temple has seen in the class of 2028. So you wrote a story about enrollment. Yes. Really impressive stats for this year coming from Temple. I was really surprised by it all. Give me a little, quick summary of what was going on with Temple's enrollment.
Yeah, so I think at the beginning of the year, the university, they do like article releases, like Temple Now. I'm sure everyone gets the emails. They reported that the class of 2028 was their highest enrollment since pandemic years. Don't quote me on that. I'm remembering that off the top of my head. But that was their highest numbers. It was a 30% increase from previous year, 2027. So yeah, and that also came up with the housing article I did the previous week. So there was a lot of data, a lot of percentages.
For sure. I mean, it's a big jump from their 10% increase goal, which was crazy. But looking at more specific categories, I think that's where it really gets interesting. Yep. So tell me a bit about those specific stats too.
So there was a lot of first-generation college students, about 40% of them, which was huge. And that was kind of like the priority of the enrollment process. They really wanted to, I think what the vice provost said to me was that they don't want students just applying and getting in, but they want them actually to be able to come to college. And that was like the push for it. They really worked hard to get them the financial aid they needed. There was a lot of students from the Temple Promise program, a lot of students from the local Philadelphia area. So a lot of huge numbers, a lot of first-generation college students that came in this year.
Yeah, is this kind of like a move, I guess? And I think he kind of mentioned this or like insinuated this in the article, but a move to make Temple more of a school marketed towards first-generation students and specifically in the Philadelphia area too.
Yeah, he said the main priority of like the enrollment staff, the admissions staff is just like form relationships, not just with students but their families. He says, as tuition gets higher, and I think I mentioned this, the U.S. World News Report, tuition is getting more and more expensive. And there's a lot of families that are wondering, like, is this money going to be like a great, like, is it going to come back in a great way? Like, is this worth the return that we're going to get on it? So it's just forming those relationships, making sure they know, like, Temple has some great programs and that we're on R1 University for research. Only 4% of colleges in the United States get that title. So a lot of push on there to make them like know, like, when you come to Temple, it's not just like a Temple education, like you're getting a high quality education per se.
For sure. And what colleges saw the biggest increase? I think CST was like
Yes,
massive jump, which is like interesting, like kind of see where people's heads are at in terms of careers in the next generations.
The highest was social work. I believe it was in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
College of Engineering was 67% increase. And behind that, I think it's like CLA, Klein. If I can remember, Klein had 218 new students.
Yeah, still fairly low for Klein. Yeah,
pretty good numbers. I think the lowest was probably like theater, film, arts, stuff like that. But even Boyer like saw big numbers. So there's across the board increases. There was also heavy increases to graduate and professional programs too. So it's not even just undergrad. Like every single school and program that Temple houses saw big increases.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, he talked a lot about like the family outreach, and he in one of his quotes he said like grassroots outreach. Like, what does that specifically look like?
From what we talked about, he mentioned, a lot of more social media outreach, a lot more like production there, a lot more like just even pamphlets going around, just, going like to more high schools in the area, going outside of the area for like more high school visits. A lot of universities used to do that previously. Like in my time in high school, we would have a week where like each college would come in with their counselors. They're kind of upping that more, especially to local Philadelphia schools. A lot more like mail in stuff at home to like hey, like this is Temple University, and then just like more counselors reaching out to not just students but parents too. Yeah,
for sure. And then there was also kind of a change on how they're educating prospective students on financial aid and all that, and also how financial aid is being distributed, if I'm not wrong. Tell me a little bit about that.
Financial aid was a really rocky thing this year. I'm sure you probably experienced it. FAFSA opens up now in December instead of October, and the deadline now, universities had to push back on that. Instead of the 1st of May, the deadline for deposits and commitments became May 15th. So there's just a lot of students were worried about not getting their financial aid on time. We also had an article with that, like PHEAA for the Pennsylvania State Grant. A lot of students didn't get the money that they needed up until the very last moment. They couldn't register for classes. So there was a push, not even just like merit scholarships, but just to make sure like students get the money that they need to come over to Temple.
And especially since there's like a larger increase, I guess, of low-income families that are coming into Temple. Yeah. They've kind of focused their attention there too as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's what the Temple Promise program tends to hit. A lot of universities have been focusing on it, but I think the FAFSA hit also caused a lot of decline. There was like a 4% decline of applications for FAFSA this year because of the changes. And like most students, now they have the requirement that a parent with a social security number has to sign off on the FAFSA, but a lot of students' parents don't have social security numbers. So there was a push there to like make up for that gap, is what I see.
For sure, yeah. I'm excited for it to be my last time to do FAFSA. That's a process with my father and my mother, but
it's really difficult, Each year I think it's even more and more difficult.
Yeah. But you kind of did a comparison to, UPenn and another area school. And we really extremely outperformed that. I mean, how do we manage to do that?
Again, outreach. And I think the advantage that Temple has, just from my perspective, is when you mention Philadelphia, Temple is one of the first schools to come up. I think we're not in the main city area, but the spot that we're at definitely gives us an advantage. Students see a lot of the students that I spoke to, they were just like, well, other than like school, I really liked when I've toured, I really liked campus, and I really liked that, it was in Philadelphia. Like there's so many opportunities for me to find like, internships here, careers here. So I think our location definitely has a thing for that. We're a public school.
Yep.
We're in the same state related schools as Penn State and Pitt. So like that's another advantage for us. Again, the research status. So a lot of students, when they think about Temple or Philadelphia, it's also Temple is related to that. I think our image goes pretty far too. We kind of are a PR school if you think about it. We have all these, we saw Obama come with Springsteen. Yeah. Like we get a lot of the big crowds, and I think that's another reason that students are really attracted to Temple.
Yeah, it was kind of looked at a little bit at the end of the article, but I mean, these schools are going to be looking to compete with Temple because of these high numbers. How are they preparing for that? in this coming year?
I mean, the enrollment office, they're prepared for it. They're going to keep doing what they're doing, but they definitely anticipate a lot of like competition between them and local universities in the area, like Drexel, UPenn. I think Swarthmore was on the list. Haverford College is on the list. Like, they're probably going to, look to Temple, see what they did this year. I mean, we're already, I think for early applicants, 24% of what they like originally anticipated. We're 24% ahead of that. Wow. They've had to add more tours onto campus. They're doing more like family related things. It's just, there's a lot going on. I'm sure we're going to see more tours come up. People have already started touring now, which is impressive because usually you don't start touring until you get accepted. Right. So there's an increase of pretty much in every single department. Housing, we've seen it. So it's interesting to see, but I think outside universities will definitely like continue to do what Temple's doing, probably go on more college visits themselves into high schools.
For sure. Thank you to our editors, Ryan, Colin, and Nurbanu for joining me on this episode, and make sure to check out all their work on the Temple News website. I'm Paolo Rocco, podcast editor for the Temple News, and this is Reprint.